Welcome to Inspire Campfire, a podcast where ordinary people tell their stories of extraordinary adventure. These are campfire stories meant to inspire the rest of us to light the fire within, get outside, follow our dreams, and return to tell our own stories. Ready? Let's strike the match.
Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Scott Wurzbacher, and this episode release happens to fall on Earth Day 2024. So it's fitting that today we're going to talk about environmental sustainability. But you know, what's good for the planet is good for us too. For today's guest, protecting the Earth can also mean investment returns and adventure, as he passionately brings all three of these things together through Energea, a company that makes investing in renewable energy accessible for everyone. Mike Silvestrini, partner and co-founder of Energea, is with us today from Chester, Connecticut. His love for adventure has taken him all over the world, including time spent with the Peace Corps. Through his experiences, Mike began to develop both passion and skills within renewable energy initiatives. He is a protector of the planet through initiatives such as Green Skies Renewable Energy and the Big Life Project, which protects over 1.6 million acres of wilderness in East Africa. Mike is a big thinker. He is a big action taker, and of course, an adventurer. And he's here to share how we can play a part in the sustainability of our planet and earn investment returns in the process. Mike, welcome to the campfire.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have this conversation. You bring together so many amazing things: protecting the planet, making a little bit of money, and adventure, of course. I'd love if we could just dive right into Energea. If you can tell us a little bit about what Energea is.
Sure. Well, in a lot of ways, Energea is a culmination of my adventure background and my love of renewable energy and the environment. So to finally, after building a solar energy company the conventional way, where we sold power to companies like Walmart and Target, and it was a purely industrious enterprise. It's called Green Skies. You mentioned it in the intro. That was my first solar company. And we were fortunate enough to be able to exit that, my partners and I, in 2017. And in my late 30s, I had a clean slate to be able to build a new company, really anything I wanted. And I didn't want to venture too far away from solar energy because it's where my expertise lies. But I knew I wanted to get more global in perspective, and then to start sewing in my experiences as an adventurer, an explorer throughout my life, and a traveler, and start weaving that into the products and services that we provided at Energea, my second business. So Energea pursues these opportunities to invest in renewable energies throughout emerging markets and the United States, and then serves them up to our investor community, where they can be participated in broadly by thousands of investors who've selected to invest alongside myself and my partners at Energea into these types of projects. And we tell them the stories about these projects so that our client base can get familiar with places far away from where we're from. We have projects in Brazil and South Africa and Colombia, and it's just kind of some cool stories of adventure along the way, while we figure out how to get renewable energies to places where most people aren't thinking about decarbonizing some of these more remote markets. But climate change requires a really broad approach to decarbonization. So we're kind of trying to stay in a new niche where we can provide decarbonization technologies to markets that are generally underserved.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Mike. This is awesome. And I wonder, what I'd like to do is ask you some questions you're in the space, you know this stuff inside and out. And for people that are listening, that maybe this is kind of a new subject to them, or they might hear it in the news, but maybe don't really fully understand what it means. I'm going to ask if you could help dumb down some of these terms for guys like me. But when you talk about investing in renewable energy, on the ground, what does that mean?
That means having equity, so ownership of a renewable energy project. So our investors own the projects, not Energia. And then our investors hire Energia to manage the project. So that in our management capacity, we identify the project, we sign all the contracts, we manage the construction of the project. And then once the project is turned on, we manage the operations and maintenance of the project. We collect the revenue, we do the financial auditing, and all the things that are necessary to create and then operate one of these projects is done by your friendly manager over at Energia. But the project is actually owned by thousands of individual retail investors. So they'll have equity in a Delaware company, and that Delaware company owns the project. And what's cool about owning these projects, it's not unlike real estate in that before we build a solar plant, we try to sell the power for 20 years before we buy the solar equipment. So we sign a contract first. And now we have a commitment for someone to buy the electricity at an agreed upon rate. Now we can comfortably and confidently go out and make an investment in constructing the project and bringing it to reality. Once the project is operationalized, that kicks in that contract. And for 20 years, we have a fairly predictable cash flow as the project makes electricity. And then we sell that electricity under the contract, harvest that revenue, pay for operating expenses, which are also all bound by contract, and then deliver whatever's left over back to our investors pro rata by shareholder.
That makes so much sense. And I appreciate, like, that actually was a really great summary. I feel like I understand a whole lot better now. When you talk about projects, could you give us some examples of a project?
Sure. So a project for us is really, we're looking for opportunities to make oversized returns for our clients. So we're not guiding them towards typical assets. We're looking for things where the risk adjusted return is where we think it's predictable and high. So for example, my partner and I, my co-founder and I identified Brazil going back about 7 years as a market that was going to be very attractive for solar energy project development. And so we went down there, we built a company in Brazil in order to execute on this thesis and started reeling in projects and building projects. We built, I don't know how many, maybe like 40 or so projects down there. They're like 35 to 50 acres a piece, if you can picture a single asset. And then they're operating under a format that is a nationwide policy in Brazil that we call community solar here in the US, where the power is not connected directly to any home or business. Instead, we generate the power and then serve it back up to the grid. But for each kilowatt hour I deliver to the grid, I get a credit, which I can then allocate towards a particular client. So we have thousands of energy customers down in Brazil who subscribe to use the power generated by these centrally generated assets. And they're not super huge assets and they're not super small. They're sort of right in the middle. And that's where we like to play. That's where we think there's the most opportunity to make money. South Africa, completely different format. There, we're doing batteries and solar on our business clients and schools on their location. So either on the ground or on their roofs. And we go right behind their meter and provide them a consistent access to electricity. And it's a completely different use case. In South Africa, the power grid doesn't have enough energy to service all the load. So throughout the day, everybody in South Africa has to deal with something called load shedding, where there's no electricity for a few hours each day. And when you have a solar and battery plant on your facility, you can continue to operate your business even during moments of load shedding. So it's a great product for them, great returns for our investors, and part of the decarbonization effort of a country that produces the dirtiest energy in the world. And it's kind of situation by situation. So each one of these strategies will identify something and say, there's going to be something here in New Mexico or in California or in Brazil or in wherever it is. We're kind of indifferent as to where it is. So long as the returns are appropriately priced for the risk and maybe even beneficial towards our investors, we'll draft around an investment thesis particular to that niche, and we'll create a product out of that. And those products can be seen on our website. And the idea is for our investors to blend together multiple products, which we call the Energea core. So you can have a little bit of Africa, a little Colombia, a little Brazil, a little hydro, a little solar, a little bit of the US. And you're making this sort of solar cocktail out of this diversified inventory, which gives you some different exposure to different currencies and different policies and the types of risks that we have in different markets, inflationary risks and things like that, in order to make the maximum amount of money and try to dispel that risk across a broad base of assets.
Yeah. So, I mean, like you're exuding like with what you do, there's this intense like knowledge of like financial markets and investment, but then you're also pulling in just the environmental piece, right? I mean, and that's, I think, what's so cool about what you're doing is just the way that you're bringing all of these things together. So from the environmental piece, there's a couple terms that you've already used today, but that you've also talked to me about on a previous call when we were getting ready for this one. And I would love to just, again, I think these are things I think we assume that people know what we're talking about, but you've talked about decarbonization a couple of times. And I wonder if you could just kind of dive a little bit deeper on that.
Yeah, sure. So essentially, first off, I'm an environmentalist first, and the business chops came in response to trying to find scalable methods to solve big time environmental problems. And so I do certain nonprofit work, but I know that where I'm going to get the most bang for my time is going to be in the for profit stuff, because that's what summons the capital resources, which makes the
Yeah.
decisions in this world. But essentially, decarbonizing is critical, as we all know. There's a carbon cycle, right? And each year, we're throwing off. This is the natural world and the human world throwing off somewhere around 550 gigatons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, and that comes from a lot of different things. It comes partially from burning of fossil fuels, as we know. It also comes from desertification. If you were to take a prairie and that's filled with biomass. Imagine all the grasses and the soils. There's carbon in all of that living organic matter. And as that prairie desertifies or becomes desert like, that carbon and that biomass is released into the atmosphere. That's almost as big of a release of carbon dioxide emissions as burning of fossil fuels. So these are huge challenges. And we can calculate how much carbon dioxide goes in the air by counting the particulates of carbon dioxide in the oxygen in the air mix, which we've been doing for a long time now. So now we kind of have the sense for how much carbon dioxide is going up, 550 gigatons. Meanwhile, through mostly photosynthesis and certain behaviors of the ocean, we're able to reabsorb about 500 gigatons. And that leaves about 50 gigatons of new carbon dioxide in the atmosphere each year. I'm simplifying it because this
Yep.
happens in cycles and there's seasons and there's a lot of things to take into consideration. But essentially, we're producing 50 gigatons of carbon dioxide more than we're consuming back through the photosynthetic process each year. And it just so happens that humans are responsible for about 50 gigatons. So that off balance is can be fixed by a radical change of human behaviors. And I'm not one that really tries to play the blame game. And I love fossil fuels. It's a blessing to humanity, and our ability to get to where we are is profound. And I'm also super optimistic that humans will find a way to install a thermostat on our atmosphere, more or less, and be able to recreate the desirable conditions for life to thrive and for coral reefs to thrive and forests to grow. And we're going to figure this out. So I'm optimistic, but the technologies and the tools that we use to get that carbon cycle back into balance are pretty well known and they're ready to deploy, but we need to get people's attention and people's money into it. And that's where Energea comes into play. The goal there is to uncork the trillions of dollars of capital that individual Americans wield. There's something like $20 trillion of IRA retirement accounts held by Americans. There's so much capital there that could solve the problem in an instant if we were to just retire on renewables instead of Amazon. So we're going to find a realistic way to get there, and it starts by converting this into value for our clients.
I love this. We're going to retire on renewables. What a quote. I love that. I mean, I
That's the
said in the
idea.
introduction, you're a big thinker, and there's no doubt. And again, I think you helped me understand. I mean, what we're talking about, this decarbonization is ensuring that that 50 gigatons that's not being reabsorbed, that's being dealt with.
Yeah, we need to produce less in the first place. And then eventually we need to be able to take some excess carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, because we're already in a place in climatic conditions where it's difficult for things like coral reef, the most sensitive parts of our ecosystem, to thrive. And we're experiencing some of the tumultuous weather and things like that. So we'd probably be better off reducing the gaseous content of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere from where it is today. We're obviously going to go way past that and then have to pull it on back with technology.
Yeah. So I think another one of the terms that I just want to talk about, and I think it's related, but you've talked about being a leader. You are a leader. I don't know that you've said this, but I picked up on it, right? You are a leader in this energy transition. And again, could you just explain what this energy transition is?
Yeah, like I mentioned, some of the big culprits of that excess carbon dioxide are natural events. But even the natural events can sometimes be tied back to human, like that desertification
Mhm.
process. Sometimes that's because the water was yanked out of the ground for agricultural purposes and resulted in additional desertification. So it can be humans behind the scenes. But there's one where humans are directly responsible, which is burning fossil fuels. In order to prevent the burning of fossil fuels, the most logical way to do that is convert everything to electricity and then produce electricity with clean, zero emitting energy power plants. And that's primarily wind and solar. We have hydro, we have nuclear, we have wind, we have solar. Those are the tools in the toolbox. They're immediately deployable, and we need to get on it. And so that energy transition is the transition from coal, and to a lesser degree, natural gas and oil fired power plants into low carbon power plants, like renewable energy. And I've been at it since 2007, when the industry was nascent. And when installing just a few solar panels was a very big deal. And then all of a sudden we started seeing much larger solar power plants. And then we had the audacity to say, when Walmart asked for solar, instead of giving them this kind of little solar power plant using a tenth of the roof, which was common in that time period, we said, what if we just blanket the whole darn thing with solar panels? How do we figure this out? And we figured it out. And Walmart was a big help to us in those days of thinking through how to do this. And then Target got on board, and then Amazon got on board, and we built a successful company, saving our clients money on the energy side and making our investors money, for the guys that own the plants. And that's what I continue to do today.
So this is a beautiful thing of putting together passion and skill and just leverage everything that you've learned in your career, but essentially just again to dumb it down for listeners, like I'm just going to try to do a recap here, but what you've built with Energia is the ability for everyday people to invest in technologies that will help take that 50 gigatons of carbon that's being put into the environment and help to reabsorb it, which
Yeah.
then facilitates this energy transition. Did I do an okay job there? Can I be a spokesperson now?
Yeah, man. That's good. Good job. You got it. I mean, that's it. And I remember, kind of an interesting story about
Yeah,
where that mindset came from. You mentioned I was in the Peace Corps, and I was in the
yeah.
Peace Corps in Mali in West Africa, which is a really fascinating country. And this is before it became kind of more radicalized. Today, it's not a very safe place. But in 2005 and 2006, when I was there, it was a really interesting place, and it was fairly safe. Um, I came back from the Peace Corps, and I was dating a girl, and her father gave me a call and said, let's go out and grab a beer. So I said, all right, got to meet the girlfriend's
Yeah.
father here. So I went out and we sat down, we had a beer, and he asked me sort of like, what, you're dating my daughter. What is it that you plan on doing professionally with your life? And I just could wax poetic at that time in my mid 20s about how deeply I felt about being a force for positive energy and helping people, getting into the communities, sort of this very grassroots Peace Corps, college kid kind of mindset where I was just so adamant that getting in there and getting your hands dirty was a respectable and honorable thing. And it was in that conversation where he explained to me that, you know, you can do that and you could have an impact on people, and there's a noble calling for that type of life. But if you really are sincere, if you're really sincere about doing something that actually helps people and has an impact on the environment and the things that you claim to care about, then you would want to do it at the maximum scale.
Mm.
And you're not going to be able to do it at the maximum scale from the ground. You're going to have to get up to a higher altitude. And, you know, being able to stroke checks for millions of dollars, that gets shit done.
Mm.
And if you're sincere about having that impact, you better figure out how to do that. And he was absolutely right. And that really blew me away. And I kind of stopped thinking about things from the grassroots perspective and started to think about how do I get more impact by having bigger buying capacity. Because let's face it, the decisions around the world get made by money. And we can move now hundreds of millions of dollars and billions even into position into these environmentally conscious infrastructure projects. That's going to have a huge impact. I don't have to worry about having solar panels, you know, on my home because I make so much clean power in my day job.
Mike, I mean, you're just bringing life, so much of life together here, right? I mean, you're a big thinker, and you just shared with us that the big thinking comes from trying to get the girl, right?
That's it, man. That's what it all. Isn't that where it all begins? I mean, that's all this is. I'm pretty sure. And now here I am, married 20 years later to the girl. I did wind up marrying her, so you know it was all worth it. But it paid off.
Oh man. Well, so how does the father-in-law think about how this is all turning out? Does he remember that conversation?
He definitely does, Scott, because he was my first investor in my first business. He invested 35 grand for 50% of my first solar company. And you know, we went on to become one of the largest commercial solar companies in the US and exited. And I think he's well aware of the power of this stuff now.
Well, I'm making light of it, but I mean, you know, the way that life kind of brings things around for you, like you end up in this conversation that you didn't realize that when you entered that conversation that it was going to have a profound effect on you. And I really appreciate how you shared what you just shared about, like, essentially if you want to have a big impact, you got to go big.
Yeah, exactly. And because you have a tendency, especially in those, you know, formational years in your early 20s when you're kind of going through school, grassroots is so appealing. And I think that one of the reasons why is because that adventurous spirit, like what you guys talk about in this podcast consistently, is that adventurous spirit. And that adventurous spirit, I think, gets confused with sort of mission sometimes when you're in your early 20s. You know, you don't have the skills to actually be useful uh, to the world yet. You're still developing those skills, but you sure as heck want to go out there and taste everything and see everything and experiment. That's where maybe we disguise mission with grassroots strategy. And then eventually you kind of get to a point where you say, like, wait a second, like if I'm sincere about this, grassroots is not going to it's not going to scale the solution. You know, and you can really pick any global problem and apply this. You need the grassroots people, and thank God for them. But you also need people to put the capital together and the inertia to actually breathe life into these missions and make them 10 or 1,000 times bigger than they could ever be at a grassroots perspective.
Yeah, this is a huge conversation, and I want to explore it a little bit. So I
All
want to,
right.
I'm going to pause because I want to build up to this. But we just talked about, like, going from, like, a grassroots on the ground based way of serving your purpose to a bigger thinking way. And so my question is going to be, how do people do that? And how did you do that? But before we answer that, I want to come back to it, because could we go back to whether it's the Peace Corps or even before that? Can we get a little early glimpse of Mike and where some of these things were founded?
Yeah. Well, one thing that I learned is that in order to kind of segue between those two questions,
Yeah.
is that if you want to be able to think big, you have to have a broad perspective. And you develop perspective largely through traveling and getting lots of different conversations with lots of different people. So since my teenage years, starting off on things like Fish Tour and just kind of road tripping in the US and being a punk high schooler that loved driving around and not going to class. I wasn't a very good student, but I was learning a ton and I was getting out there. And then that continued to evolve throughout my early 20s. Just really traveling a ton. Dated an Australian girl, went to 7 or 8 countries there, lived in Australia on 2 different 1 year experiments in my early 20s. Got to see and do a lot, and then fell in love with school again in my sort of, by the time I was 23 or 24, I was ready to study. And that led me to the Peace Corps. And by then, I had already been to like the Scotlands and the Englands and the Frances and the Australias, sort of those easier countries to travel. And I was ready to graduate to more diverse perspectives and more extreme circumstances. And I fell in love with Africa. And that's why I chose Africa for the Peace Corps, and then eventually got a master's degree in studying that continent because I just find it so fascinating. And to learn a lot, you really have to get away from the things and the perspectives that you're born into. And if you can accomplish that, you can get a bit of a worldview that gives you a sense of tempo around things are changing. You start listening and start identifying where trends are, real trends, not trends in your mind or in your neighborhood or in your clique, the real trends of the world. And that's where business is. It's like Wayne Gretzky, you got to go to where the puck is going.
Mm.
When you're in your early 20s, and I tell kids this when I have the opportunity to speak with them, you got to go where the money's going. Where is it going? Well, it's going into the energy transition. It's going to go into carbon credits. It's going into AI. I mean, go to where the world is screaming, "We want more." And if you insert yourself into those gushing rivers of financial activity, there's going to be a lot of opportunity for you to be creative and create companies and take advantage of that momentum. And
So
that's what I was able to do.
let me ask you then, you talk about like getting perspective by traveling, expanding your mind, and like figuring out where these trends are. Like for you, can you think of like some moments or maybe some places or experiences that you had, like whether it was in your 20s or even beyond or before, where you
Mhm.
actually like witnessed those things firsthand?
I mean, it's incremental. You start off, when I'm from Connecticut, as you
Mhm.
mentioned, a small town, and in the '90s, Colorado was far away.
Mhm.
People didn't travel, at least in my Nintendo, Michael Jordan upbringing.
Yeah.
Travel wasn't really a big part of our upbringing. So when I decided to go to Colorado to snowboard for a season when I was 18 years old, it was a big deal for me.
Yeah.
And then that's where I met the Australian girl. And for Australians, they kind of travel because they're marooned on over there on the other side of the world, so they're very used to global travel. And through a relationship there, I was able to go and kind of hop on that train and see a little bit more Europe and see Latin America a little bit and Australia, and then saw a little bit of Southeast Asia, and then so you kind of gradually get comfortable with things, and then Africa comes around. In my mind, being sort of now you're ready to kind of see really broad versions of humanity. So you have to build it over time, and you don't have to do it the way I did it. I mean, you could probably achieve most of what I achieved through a lot of reading and being open-minded and living in a city where you could interact with lots of people from other different places. But you need that diversification of thinking, I think, to develop that perspective.
Yeah. So, man, you're just kind of blowing my mind on all this. I love hearing this. I guess I would love to hear like maybe a little bit more of the progression, maybe even a little bit of your time in the Peace Corps. And I guess what I'm really trying to understand is where your passion for like sustainability, the environment, protecting the planet. Because this seems to me there's something inside you that feels some
Yeah.
degree of a protector for the earth.
Well, it's more than that, and I don't know where it comes from, but I see it all the time that I just feel like it's obvious to me to care about something like climate change or to care about species going extinct. it seems to me to be obvious to care about supporting, the parent teacher organization in your school. It seems like obvious to participate in nonprofits locally. But I do find, to my disappointment often, that my willingness to jump onto these boards and to open my wallet and share resources with good ideas that are well-meaning and have an positive impact on people, I don't feel like I'm met halfway by others in my community. For me, investing in solar is a no-brainer, and I've done really well by doing that. But it still takes a lot of convincing to get somebody to do that. I mean, it goes back to solar energy is 30-40% cheaper than conventional energy. I mean, why are we still debating this? Because there's a reluctance actually to sometimes do the right thing. I've never had that. It's just, for me, it's just been um, instinctual to, to take that step.
Yeah. And so, I mean, that does speak to the thing inside of you, because I heard you say it seems obvious several times. And like, a lot of times you hear that sometimes, like, if you're searching for your gift or your thing, it's like that thing that's just so obvious and so instinctual that you don't even, like, you just assume everybody else has it too. But, you just acknowledge that not everybody does. So I think it's really
Unfortunately.
cool that you're doing such big things in this space that, as you said, seems so obvious to you.
Yeah, man, it's the only way of life I could imagine.
Yeah. So could we go back to the conversation with the father-in-law and talk about just so grassroots is an option, but thinking bigger is also an option. But I think there's a gap, like the how, right? What is the
Yeah,
how?
it's business. And that's another gift I got from my to be father-in-law, is that, my dad was a newspaper man, my mom was a nurse, and I grew up in a middle class Connecticut community, I think like you did, right, Scott?
Yeah.
So you know what it looked like, right? And I didn't see really the inside of a business until I started one, and it wasn't really widely understood. This is not a particularly entrepreneurial culture. People unanimously agree that we work hard. That's always been ingrained into our culture. But creating a business is something that I really learned from my father-in-law, that you can do that. You can just go and start a company. That was kind of novel to me in my 20s. That if you wanted to do something, you just go and do it. And that was kind of cool to realize that if I really wanted to create a company that like address climate change, and it could have been anything else, it could have been anything, you go and do it. And I think that entrepreneurship is that missing link between the realization that scale is going to be necessary to have meaning in your life. At least for me, scale was important for the way I grade my own existence. But how to do it is entrepreneurship, starting companies, and then eventually developing the skills. And of course, when you start not as an entrepreneur, it's like anything else. Starting off on an instrument or starting off in a new profession, you don't know anything. And I made every mistake you can make 10 times over, and dealt with the consequences. And but was able to get through it and keep the business going and keep growing. I mean, my first company, we were out of business every day of the week, but we just refused to stop. So you can't stop me from continuing, I suppose. So we just kept on fighting through that. And then eventually, before you know, you wake up one day and you actually know how to do this. And then that impact can really start to happen.
So if for somebody that's struck by this conversation, again, like grassroots versus like going this entrepreneurial path, like when you're in that place of making that decision, what are next actions that person that chooses the bigger way, the entrepreneurial way, what are some of those next actions?
Okay, well, that's a good question. And I've seen it done incorrectly many times, and I've seen it done correctly only a few. The incorrect way is very popular amongst especially like younger people, is to like make a slide deck and then go and try to raise money. Right? That's not the correct way, in my opinion, about how to start a company. You start a company by creating a product and then getting somebody to buy it. And then once somebody buys it, you try to make a profit from it. And then you try to sell more of it. I mean, you really got to get out there and beat the pavement and do the work first. A lot of people's first move these days is to like raise money first.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll put somebody else is going to take the risk of your entrepreneurial journey. That's basically what you're doing. You're passing the liability of yourself onto somebody else. And that doesn't really go well because you forego the lessons that you learned by failing with yourself at the front of the line. And when you kind of go out there and you say, I don't care if I have to swing pizzas until I figure this out, I'm gonna figure this out. And then you do it, and then you kind of get that sale, and it means everything to you, and you will never fail on that customer because you know directly how important it is. But when that's somebody else's money, you may not be imprinted with the importance of your customer and the importance of the quality of your service. So I think that those things go hand in hand. But to start off, you got to figure out what it is that you're going to do and then get somebody to buy it.
That's amazing. Thank you. Like it's really good advice. I mean, it seems kind of simple, but you're right. I mean, the incorrect way that you outline, create the slide deck and raise money. I mean, that does seem like that's the way that a lot of people attempt to get started.
Yeah, and I think that became popular in Silicon Valley, where technology-based solutions kind of lend itself more to that. But the New England way, this old Northeastern approach is sort of get out there and be profitable every single day. We don't have companies up here that take $100 million losses year over year for a decade and still go public. Yeah. That's not really our architecture of our cultural business mind. And my company is profitable, and that's the way I believe in to verify that you have something that's worth existing.
Yeah, I love it. So Mike, just kind of bringing this back around to Energea and the sort of the way that you've grown this business. Can you give us a little glimpse into what Energea looks like today as a company?
Yeah, sure. So we're about 50 people scattered across the world, and we manage investments for about 4,000 investors who've pooled together about $120 million that they've given to our control for us to manage the investment into renewable energy projects across Brazil, South Africa, and the United States. We have many operating solar energy projects, which are yielding those promised dividends back to our investors each month. We've averaged over a 12% IRR since inception across all portfolios and all investors on the platform. And we're really confident that we can continue that for years to come. And it's a great product. And the more successful we are, the more chum in the water for more investors to come and start participating in the energy transition. And I think that Energea, the real reason why I built this is because I can't imagine us figuring this climate change thing out unless there are tools for us to be able to take action on an individual basis. And we're really going to need a broad base of participation, in my mind, for this to work. And Energea is a tool that we hope will be used by future generations long after I'm done doing this. Hopefully it'll continue so that it can continue to simultaneously give people a little bit more control over their money. And I think we do a great job of being transparent and explaining where the money is and how it works. And people with long range investment strategies appreciate that, while simultaneously placing that capital into low carbon infrastructure, which has some staying power. It's uncorrelated to the stock market. It doesn't care what Donald Trump tweets. It doesn't matter. It just kind of cruises along, selling power along its contractual life. And we think that is double valuable. And right now, it was, the last few years we've been building it. All the software that goes underneath this thing, all the legal architecture underneath operating solar assets in multiple continents, all the technology of managing contractors and operations and maintenance trucks and dispatching technicians and all that stuff. We've built it all. And now we're in a position to just tell everybody about it and let it scale.
Yeah. I think about this like money is a difficult topic, right? It's a charged topic, right? And as you said, I
Yeah.
mean, if you want to make real impact, like you've got to get money behind it, right? But I guess like when people are talking to companies that produce investment returns, like there's a guard that goes up, right? But for you're doing this in such a way that it's like it's literally helping the planet and helping solve problems. And I'm just curious for you, like what it's like to be able to bring these two things together, because it is a way for people to earn a good, respectable, solid investment return, but at the same time, like they're literally helping to solve this energy problem. I guess I'm just wondering what it's like for you personally to know that you're able to bring those things together.
I can tell you it's very stressful. I work tirelessly. I work as
Yeah,
many hours as anybody I know. And it's but when you really believe in something,
yeah,
and it's based off of a capitalistic engine structure, you really are left pouring your life into it. And it takes a lot. But I wouldn't want it any other way. There's a lot of suckers out there working as hard as I do. We're all in this together, and at least every time I find the next level of success, I know that the byproduct of my success is a little less carbon going into the atmosphere, a few more trees planted. With Big Life. Big Life is kind of an interesting one because it's a nonprofit business, and I work at Big Life with the same tenacity that I do at Energia. And the fact that it doesn't make any profit or pay a salary means nothing to me. It is just that there is work to be done. There is structures that need to be developed in order to accomplish a mission. This mission is to prevent poaching of elephants in East Africa. And we've gone from 400 poached elephants a year in our area of operation before we got ramped up to zero. There is no poaching in our area of operation anymore, and that's an incredible success that we're super proud of. So you get those kind of like every couple of years, you get this huge emotional reward of having accomplished something, and that's what keeps you going. It's like golfing. You hit that, you suck at golf all day long, and then you hit that one shot, and I felt good, and you kind of brings you back next time. I think building businesses that with the intention of having a positive environmental impact has the same type of effect.
yeah. So you mentioned Big Life, and I did want to touch on that. I mentioned it in the introduction. You just kind of gave a little bit of a summary, but I wonder if you could just back up and just for listeners, what is Big Life?
Sure. So there are some problems that are not easily handled by capital strategy, and preventing poaching in East Africa is one of them. And it's something that I learned about and I cared about, and I wanted to do something about the rate at which we are annihilating the last of the megafauna or the large animals of the earth. And I put together a little thinking group to figure out how we were going to address this issue. Are we going to buy some land? And this is after I'd sold my first company, so we had a lot of options.
Okay.
And we eventually discovered this organization called Big Life. Flew out to Kenya and met with the founders, and flew around their area of operation and got to see on the ground, over 400 Maasai Rangers protecting this ecosystem, and said, "Wow, I got to be part of this. I got to be part of it." So joined the board, have made it a huge part of my professional perspective now, and we raise about $10 million a year from the kindness of individuals. So conversely to the earlier part of the conversation where it doesn't seem like anybody else cares, well, some people do. Some people do. And those people allow us to perform our work with no return on investment other than the hope that someday our grandchildren will still live in a world with elephants and lions and leopards and the types of wildlife that lives in this area and only in this area, and it's shrinking. So it's an important task, and you make money right now. The energy transition is a profit opportunity. Wildlife conservation isn't yet, but it might be one day. And so for now, we're getting it done in the nonprofit method.
Hmm. Mike, if people are interested in your story, or want to get involved and help or want to invest with Energea, how do they do that?
Well, for Energea, energea.com, if we've done a good job, they should explain exactly what to do and how to do it and why we do it. To follow more about our story, we're really big on expeditions, and we're sponsoring expeditions, Energea expeditions, and Energea films work in tandem to create some of the stories around exploration. A world worth exploring is the way I like to say it,
Nice.
because really it's all together, right? The exploration and the beauty of the world and the natural world and the energy transition. I link those all into my mindscape as a place I want to be. So if you're interested in those types of things, you should follow our social media on Instagram or TikTok, and you can follow along the stories as we bring them, get out there in the world and bring back those stories for everyone to enjoy.
Great. We'll make sure to put your social media channels in our show notes. So I got to circle back to something that you mentioned on this call and also the first time we talked, and that
Okay.
was these fish tours that you went on when you were young.
Yeah.
Because
Transformative.
I feel like those were pivotal for you.
Yeah, they were. They
And
were.
I wonder like if you could just like what was the draw there? And then like did you ever think going on those fish tours that life would turn out the way that it did for you? And that
I
would be the
mean,
catalyst.
you're 16 years old, you're in high school, and you're expected to go to school and pay attention to your chemistry teacher and get an A. That's the expectation.
Yeah.
But I just really struggled to remain interested. I don't sit well in a classroom and kind of obey orders the way that that structure requires you to do. And while many of my peers were doing that, you know I was cruising down to Virginia Beach to go see this next show, and realizing that there was nobody really that could stop me. And finding a couple guys crazy enough to come along, and like that really kind of, it was that freedom,
Yeah.
the freedom to do what you think is right for yourself, and to, instead of following the charted path. And I think that fish tour was my first experiment in going my own way, and it resonated throughout, and maybe it gave part of the giving me the courage to do the things I've done since.
Yeah, I'm so glad we finished with it because I think your fish tour experience, like honestly, it gives so much hope to so many people.
Yeah, man.
It's awesome.
Find your adventure. Find your
Yeah.
adventure.
And so that's maybe where your adventure starts. And it's been a wild ride. And I know you're just getting started. There's so much more coming for you. But, at some point, Hollywood's going to find out about you, Mike. And when they do, and they decide to make a Hollywood movie about you, I want to know who's going to be the actor that's going to play you in your movie.
An actor that would play, well, I've heard before, this is before when I had hair and I didn't have sort of the hourglass shape. Some people thought I looked like Tom Cruise, and he seems
Nice.
like a badass. Let's go Tom Cruise then.
Let's do it. I mean, let's go. Hey, we said go big, right?
That's it.
That's it. And what's your movie going to be called?
Oh man. Oh, that's a good one. Jeez. Whatever it takes.
Ooh, I love it. Whatever it takes, starring Tom
I don't
Cruise.
know.
This is amazing. Mike, this has been seriously just this has been an awesome conversation. I really appreciate your time today. And for those listening, I hope you've been inspired today as much as I have. I hope Mike's story has encouraged you to listen to the voice inside that calls you to adventure, because we want to hear your story next. If you have a story to tell or just need a nudge to create one, please send me an email. We'd also appreciate it if you'd help us spread the word by leaving a review and sharing or tagging Inspire Campfire in your social media. And until next time, I want to encourage you to get outside. Thanks for listening. Mike, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks, brother. Appreciate it.